Welcome to the Fridge and Pantry Review, 35 everyday products for everyday people. I prepared this review for you into 5 parts, and the first we're starting with is the introduction. In the introduction we're going to cover my background and why I'm doing this review, and also we're going to cover things like a nutritional hierarchy as well as some other things about how foods end up in our shopping baskets. This review is for you if you're not a fan of cooking, if you're really busy and don't have time to cook everything from scratch, and so you need some quicker options to have on hand. If you've just found out you have a food intolerance, it'll be especially useful if you have a food intolerance to dairy, as I avoid dairy and this is my fridge and pantry I'm reviewing. But it'll also be useful if you have issues with gluten, soy, and a couple of other foods as well. It'll be useful if you're trying to eat less meat, or if you've recently decided to follow a vegetarian or vegan diet, or if you're feeling a little bit like this. You just saw your naturopath, and now you're trying to figure out what you can buy. I can completely resonate with this because if you see me shopping, this is how I look quite a lot of the time, analysing the labels. There's so much information out there, and it can be really overwhelming when you first begin changing your lifestyle and your diet style, to find out exactly what you can buy and what you can eat, because there are so many different sources of information telling you what you should be doing on the packaging of the products, on the front, on the sides, on the back, on the nutrition panel. There are books telling you what you should be doing, there's blogs telling you what you'd be doing, articles from all sorts of sources, and so it can be really confusing to figure it out. And then you go and see someone, and then they give you a list of things that you can eat and can't eat, and it's maybe no less confusing after all of that. And so I thought, rather than having a list of just names on a page, I would try and make something a bit more useful and summarize it for you so that you could see this is what I'm buying, and you can begin looking at these labels yourselves. And I'm going to go through some with you during this presentation just so you can begin to get a feel for what sort of things we're looking at and how I'm thinking when I go shopping. Because I first got interested in nutrition about 25 years ago now. I was early high school when I was first interested in nutrition, and so I organised my science degree setting up because I really wanted to go down the nutrition path, and then I spent a number of years in medical research science, and then after a number of years I decided to discontinue research and study naturopathy. And so I've sort of looked at this from both sides of the fence, and personally as well, as I've had food intolerances, my kids have had food intolerances and all other sorts of health issues, and then clinically the changes that I see, and I find nutrition to be one of the big needle movers for people's health. And depending on who you're seeing and how they work, they'll have a different belief on just how big a role nutrition plays in health. But for me, I really believe nutrition is a huge needle mover in your health, and I see amazing results of people changing their diet styles and nutrition eating habits in clinic, as I've seen in my own personal life. And I'm always looking and always asking questions to try and see that, you know, we're doing the best that we can do with what we have. And so if you're watching my stuff, I'm hoping to show you a pretty balanced view and a pretty rational view. You'll find, especially if you're online a lot, that you'll see all sorts of opinions and information and some really extreme beliefs about nutrition, and you know, it'll seem very rigid and very tricky if you're following the people who make it seem more tricky. So basically this is to really give you a balanced view, and not be fanaticist about it, but try and actually be following the practices that really, you know, help make health better. So I thought this would give you a place to start. Another reason I wanted to put this little review together is because whenever I've gone shopping looking for something that a friend or, you know, fellow naturopath has told me about, and I'm scouring the shelves, and it can be really tricky to find that product if I don't know what I'm looking for. And so I thought, if I just open my fridge and my pantry and take photos of everything that I've got, even if in your part of the world you don't have the same products on the shelf that I've got, you'll at least have some context for what quinoa looks like, or you'll think, okay, that's what I'm looking for. It looks like this, and so it'll help narrow it down for you when you do go to your shops, and suddenly things you've never noticed before might start jumping out, and you'll begin to pay attention to them. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to my pantry. A really quick disclaimer here. I just like to let you know I don't work for any of the companies whose products I'm reviewing here. This is just a simple review of things that I've tried and liked and that I've actually got at home. And if you were to visit me, you would find a number of these things in my cupboard, because I'm always trying new stuff as well. And these are the things I currently like, but as new products come out or I get clients with different needs, I'm always buying and tasting and cooking with and trying to find things that are relevant to the people that I'm seeing and helping. So I may do another review down the track, because there's heaps of things that I like that I've tried that I haven't actually managed to fit into this review. Otherwise we'll be here all week. And as much as I love nutrition, I'm sure that there are other things you've got to do. So the next disclaimer I'd like to make is that I deal mainly with food intolerances in clinic, and personally we have a food intolerance. But if you have a serious allergy, or you're preparing food for someone with a serious allergy, so an allergy is different to an intolerance, be sure to check all the labels for traces of that allergen. Companies change their labels from time to time, and so don't make any assumptions. Always read the label. And also, if you have celiac disease, for example, always check that the quinoa that you buy actually is produced and packaged in a gluten-free facility, because just because quinoa is a gluten-free grain, it doesn't necessarily mean that the one that you buy will be free of traces of gluten. Same with your rice and things like that. So always read your labels to make sure. And if you're at all confused or concerned, just have a chat with your allergy specialist. So the broad category of products that I'm going to review in this little talk are basically things that I find that people find the most tricky when they're changing their diet from a clinical standpoint, and also things that I found the trickiest to change from a personal one. So I'm going to be covering some milk alternatives, some breakfast foods, lunch foods, dinner foods, and some other alternatives that help make your new diet style still a little bit fun. So things like cheese alternatives that actually taste like cheese, which you really appreciate when you give up dairy, and other things as well, like sauces and seasonings, and some of the things like little desserts. So just some context before we look at my pantry and fridge review. What ultimately ends up in your shopping basket and in your fridge and in your pantry, like I said earlier, is it's really to do with a whole host of things. It's your knowledge about nutrition, and that can either be what you found out yourself or the resources that you have who are giving you nutrition information. So, for example, if you have a nutritional healthcare practitioner, like a naturopath or a nutritionist, it'll also be dependent on the resources that you have available. So in naturopathy, we love organic food, but not everybody can afford 100% organic. So it's how you're going to make the best choices with what you have. Or you might live somewhere remote, so you don't actually have these sorts of options available in the supermarket that people in the city would have, and vice versa. If you're seeing a naturopath or someone in the natural nutrition, natural health world, we've also got a bit of a food hierarchy, and as I sort of alluded to, we like organic foods and fresh foods and all of that. And lastly, the other thing that's going to impact what ends up in your pantry and your fridge are also your consciousness about other issues when it comes to food and sustainability and environmental friendliness and the bigger picture. The naturopathic food hierarchy, this is a summarised version. I've got a much longer version of this, but again, the talk, I want to really get into the pantry foods. So I'm just going to touch on this to show you. Basically, we would love the majority of your diet to come from fresh, whole foods with minimal processing. You know, in an ideal world, everything would be homemade and there would be no need for additives. The reality is, not everybody has that sort of time or space to store all those whole foods. And a lot of people don't even have the equipment. And so, if all you've got in your kitchen is a stick blender, you know, you're not going to be able to make your own flour or anything like that. And the same thing, if you're living in a really small apartment and you don't have green fingers, you're not going to be able to grow your own salad veggies either. So it's about working with what you have access to and making the best choices. So, you know, you're going to have some foods with some processing, and you need to ideally just avoid the nastiest additives and put it in perspective how much of your dietary week is that food choice. And, you know, down the bottom you want to have, that's your 5%, where, you know, sometimes you get home late and you just have a convenience food, and it might be a jarred sauce or, you know, frozen veggies or whatever. It's the best that you can do with what you have at hand. So let's get started. So up next are the milk alternatives and breakfast foods, and here we're going to cover a mini label reading lesson.